Good morning, everyone. We're going to look at the project for the tech tools for the classroom, and it's a very similar process with the classroom implementation project as well. I've got my edit mode off, so you should have a very similar screen in front of you. Before you ever get started with anything, it's always, of course, a good idea to look at the rubric. So I'm going to look at the second rubric because that's what I have right in front of me. And so you can see here that we're going to get the points are divvied up according to the following components. Your product should be completed and posted to Blackboard. It should be clear and visually appealing. In your narrative that you post to Blackboard, you need to make sure you give a really thorough description of how you intend on using the tool in the classroom. And make sure that this is as close to best practice as possible. We are all coming from very different content areas and experience levels, so providing that thorough description helps all of us really visualize what you're going to be doing. And additionally, when you provide that thorough description and an example of how you're using the tool, we are adding that information to our schema, and it gives us one more tool in our repertoire that we can pull out when we're thinking of, how do I best teach this lesson on fractions? I think I remember someone using Plicker as a response tool with their decimal lesson. I'm going to see if it might work in my classroom. It's a really poor example that I pulled out of the top of my head, but I'm sure you get the gist. Make sure that you give us the content area and the grade level in addition to describing how you're going to use the tool in your classroom. Curriculum standards, for those of us in the classroom, this is second nature for us to begin with curriculum standards and make sure that the lesson is built around the standards. We create our objectives to align with the standards, and then our assessment should align with the objectives, which have already been aligned, as I said, with the standards. If you are not currently in the classroom, this process may still be a little unnatural, but hopefully as you progress through the course, it becomes a little bit easier to do. And I'm going to show you in just a minute how you can do that maybe a little bit easier. With research, when we're in the classroom, we always need to make sure that what we're doing is based on best practice, and that is best done by using the available research out there. So we are practicing with that a little bit in our class. And then with conventions, of course, you want to make sure that anything you post is free of spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors. Now, the curriculum standards, if you're not quite familiar how to use those in your lesson planning, I've got them posted for you in a couple of places. They're under course documents, and then they're also in classroom implementation. I believe there's a spot there, where they are located. Additionally, honestly, if I were trying to find the standards, I would probably just Google South Carolina curriculum standards, and it'll take you to the same place. So this is the State Department's website, and while we are, of course, using South Carolina standards because we are located in South Carolina, this process is the same or very, very similar no matter where you are. If you are in another state, you'll use their state standards, or you might possibly use Common Core state standards depending on what state you're teaching in. If you teach in outside of the U.S. in an international school, there are standards everywhere. We base our instruction on standards. So let's say I'm not quite in the classroom yet, but I'm intending on teaching an English class or a social studies class. Maybe you're not quite sure yet what you want to teach. Go ahead and, for the sake of this course, just pick something. And English language arts is what I'm going to use to show you this process. You can see the standards broken down here if you want the whole document, or if you would rather have it by grade level. Let's look at grade level here. I'm going to scroll down. There's middle grades. We've got it broken up to inquiry-based literacy, reading, literary text, which is also called fiction text sometimes, and then informational text, writing, and communication. And then we go down here to high school, and you can see either by grade level or broken up again into those categories. And if you're familiar with Common Core, they're very closely aligned here. So let's pull up, we'll say English 2. Being a little slow this morning. And here you can see the standards. I would take a minute to familiarize myself with the document, skim through. And this is your standard. These are going to be your indicators. The standard and bold indicators are in regular font. Here we tell the fundamentals of writing and then exactly what standards you're going to be teaching in your class or responsible for teaching. So these are kind of our guide to where we know exactly what needs to happen in our course. So this one just kind of pops out at me. Gather ideas from text, multimedia, and personal experience to write narratives. So narratives are personal stories. And this standard or indicator is asking that we teach students how to gather ideas from multiple places in order to write a narrative that, first of all, has to be developed with details and proper sequence. It should have a problem, a point of view, a narrator. We should have dialogue, pacing, description. So all of these are mini lessons that you could teach in your classroom. You might have a lesson on developing experiences or having great detail. So maybe you have your students find a spot in their writing that isn't detailed, and they can, after listening to your mini lesson, they can think about that and add a little bit more detail to what they're doing. Coming down here to grammar, we've got parallel structure, independent phrases, dependent noun, relative, all these clauses, fun stuff. Using commas to separate parallel structures. So go through, if you are not in a classroom and not quite sure yet what you're going to teach, go through and see if you can find anything that piques your interest, and then align your technology tool to the standards. So, for example, let's choose one and kind of follow it through. So our standard is summarize key details and ideas to support analysis of central ideas. Determine a central idea. A lot of times you'll hear this called a main idea. Determine a central idea of text and analyze its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and redefined by specific details. Provide an objective summary of the text. So you have two things here that you could really work on teaching, main idea as well as writing a summary. So perhaps you teach your students, you have a couple of texts that you read together and you show them how to get the main idea. Then you maybe put them in small groups and you have them practice reading a few texts and determining what the main idea is. And then you'd have them independently read a text and tell you the main idea. And with the response tools, perhaps you provide them with that text, you have some conversations, and then as they leave, their exit ticket is to give you the main idea. So either they use Socrative to give a couple sentences on the main idea, or maybe you had them use Plickers and you have the main idea, maybe 4 different versions, and they hold their note card so that their correct, or their answer, what they think the answer is showing on top. And that would be how you'd use a student response tool, but for the purpose, I should say, of teaching that content. And in this case, it would be for the purpose of assessing the content to see if your students know what you are referring to. The process for other content areas is going to be incredibly similar. If you want to do math, they've got 2 different versions to print here, but they don't have it split up by grade level. You can do Control F or Command F depending if you're on a desktop or a Dell versus a Mac, a PC versus a Mac, I should say. So I'm going to type in 5th grade, and it'll take me, maybe I just type in 5th. No, not so much. Let's try a different approach. There's fractions. I know that we covered that in grade 5. Here we go. This is Key Concepts by grade band. This is not very useful right now, so we'll just have that go away. And we'll just scroll down. I'm sorry, don't get sick by watching me scroll through here. Here's grade 4, and here's grade 5. So we've got the standards listed. The process standards are first, and then we come down here, grade 5. See, I wasn't using the right terminology. You've got number, sense, and base 10 on the side here. Fractions are under number and ops, algebraic thinking, geometry, measurement, data analysis. So go under, see if something interests you more than something else, and let's go here to numbers. So we'll do fractions for number sense. So one of the standards is add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators using a variety of models. So here with our vocabulary tech tools, we could have had students define words like denominator, numerator, mixed number, and then they could have used maybe Padlet or Lino to post a photograph with maybe an arrow pointing to, if you're doing numerator, have an actual fraction right now and then have an arrow pointing to the numerator. And then a definition of what the numerator actually is. So students are getting a visual as well as a verbal definition, or they're creating a visual and a verbal definition, hopefully putting that together themselves. With the assessment tools, the response tools, you could use Clicker very, very easily here. You could do something as simple as having a couple of questions on the board, have different answers, and then they hold up what they think the correct answer is. Again, Socrative would work really well here as well. You have, what were your other tools? Exit ticket. Before students leave, they have to work out a problem and provide you with the right answer, or maybe they tell you something as simple. Maybe you pose the question of, what are you still having difficulty with? And they can say, well, I really don't understand how to turn a mixed number into a fraction. Can you help me with that? So I think that there are a couple of different ways to use this. Maybe you have students posting to Padlet or Lino with resources that they've found that have helped them with adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. So really, you can get creative as long as what you're doing matches with the standard that you've chosen. It's just kind of a process there. Once you have your standard, always begin with your standard, then write your objective. Objectives are typically the student will be able to. So the student will be able to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. Okay? And that's what you would focus on. Now, in your lesson, you're going to be making sure they use a couple of different models. Maybe one lesson you focus on using a model, an area model, and then maybe the next lesson you focus on using the number line, so that they're getting a couple of different ways to solve these math problems. Once you have your standard and your objectives written, then for the Tech Tools project, just give a little bit of description. How are you going to use this in your classroom? Create a student sample, what it might look like, and then you'll post that to Blackboard. With classroom implementation, you're doing a little bit more work here. It's maybe more formal would be the way to say it. With classroom implementation, you're going to make sure that you type everything up on a lesson plan template, and you're going to turn it in on Blackboard as opposed to posting it in a discussion board. So you'll be turning it in a little bit of a different way also. I hope this helps. Please call or email with any questions that you still have.